time. It feels weird standing.
Yeah, you can sit down. Go for it. Sit down.
Yeah. So I was actually thinking to myself as I came in here, I was like, wow, this is pretty hardcore group. It's super nice. We're not going to have many more of these, and decided to like spend some time over here. So thanks for taking the time, and thanks for letting me speak. Yeah, if I start at the beginning, I was one of the co-founders of Code 42 back in 2001. That's a long time ago. It's a software company, and then what we found was we found a fit in backing up laptops when you really boil it all down. It turns out that laptops were really hard to back up at the time though, and backup was thought about backing up servers, backing up desktop machines, but nobody was really thinking about laptops back in 2007. I remember 2007, 10 years ago, the iPhone just came out, right? Nobody had ever even seen an iPhone before that. So CrashPlan was our product that allowed people to back up their Macs, back up their PCs, back up their any personal computer that they had. But what was happening at the time that was the real market driver for us was that for the first time people were taking pictures with digital cameras and they were saving them to their hard drives, and so when that hard drive crashed, something really important was lost. It was a birthday, it was a wedding, it was graduation, it was first time you went to like Disney World. All these great things, these life events, they were like gone. And so instead of just losing like a spreadsheet or a word processing document or something that might be in your favorite video game, you were actually losing elements of your life. And that was the big thing that we tapped into that really started resonating with the market. People couldn't go to I'm not dating myself now, but people couldn't go to like Walgreens with some photo negatives back when cameras weren't digital and like go get reprints. And so that was a big deal like 10 years ago. We fast forward, it turns out that backing up data on laptops was much more important than just doing it for consumers. It was also very important for businesses. And so then we were able to take what we had done for the consumer space and then apply it to the business space. And that turned out to be a really big revenue generating opportunity. The world's largest organizations use CrashPlan to back up all their laptops in their organization. And the reason that they do that isn't just to back up the data. It's so that when they can actually see what's happening on the laptop at any given time. So this actually has big ramifications for legal departments, for security departments, compliance departments. As you guys get out in the workforce, you're going to learn that much of business has nothing to do with actually building valuable things. It has everything to do with following regulation and rules and things that aren't that fun, but you have to do it. And there's lots of value if you can make those processes really streamlined and easy. And so CrashPlan was able to take processes that were taking 4 weeks of manual work by lawyers and security teams and turn it into a push-button operation that would just literally take a second. And so let's say that you were getting subpoenaed and we had to go make sure that all the data on your laptop was exactly what we thought it was going to be. Instead, what they would do is they would literally tell you, hey, you're being put on legal hold. And then if you were, say, doing something pretty shady, you would just go, oh, I'm being put on, thank you. And then you take the data off your computer and you change everything so it didn't look like you were guilty of anything. With CrashPlan, they didn't have to do that anymore. They literally could push a button and then CrashPlan would just silently start backing up and watching everything that person was doing, so we would know if they actually started deleting files. We would know if they started moving files off of the computer onto, like, say, a USB drive. So that brings a lot of value to, you can imagine that's a lot of value for a really large organization that does like billions and billions of dollars in revenue. Part of their budget is to handle $100 million lawsuits. So we were able to find that was a really lucrative opportunity for us. We capitalized on it, and then you fast forward to 2014, 2015 time frame. The company's on its way to do over $100 million, and at that point, I had found that I had done my job. Taking a company from being literally 3 guys in a basement, my basement, where we would literally debate whether or not we should spend $7 to go buy melanin boards from Home Depot, because that's what we would do. We didn't even buy whiteboards. We were like, let's go to Home Depot and buy melanin boards because they're the same thing. And we would debate that. We would debate, should we get another phone line for the house? That's an extra $14 a month. So being very, very frugal. Before I cut into there, I probably should provide some background. My personal story, I'm a programmer, a technologist. I've been programming since I was 9 years old. I started out on the Apple II platform, so this is in the mid-'80s. So I've been able to see the progression of computers from being actual like personal computers to supercomputers in your pocket. The iPhone, new Pixel 2, they're amazing, amazing machines. And so I have a really great appreciation for not only just the
things you can do with it, but just the hardware engineering that goes into these things. It's science fiction. If you were to show me one of those things back in the mid-'80s, it's just unbelievable. And then as my goal was to make video games. And so on those machines, now you have to remember, these are, who here remembers the NES, Nintendo NES? All right, cool. All right, so that does make it a done, right? Think of the video games that you played on that thing, right? Now make that like 10 times worse. That's what we're talking about for the types of games that were like on the Apple II. Monochrome, you had like maybe a palette of 8 colors. Like the resolution on for the entire screen was like 280 by 192. That was the entire screen. And so, but I was really enamored with just making something that I could impress my friends with. So my first few game attempts were really terrible. My friends were like, that sucks. I would never play that. And then I locked myself in the library and in my bedroom for a whole summer, taught myself assembly language programming. And by age 11, I'd actually made a pretty cool game that looked a lot like a combination of Space Invaders and a little bit of like kind of Defender sound effects in there. And my friends were like, that's not bad. You could hold my interest for like maybe 5 minutes here. What's really ironic is that if I were to go back in time and tell my younger self, go back, tell my 11-year-old self, hey Mitch, all that time that you're spending learning how to do all this, page buffering and assembly code will result in you backing up computers. I think I would have quit. But it turns out that the real value in having done what I did was not just in learning how to make something that didn't exist before, but it would lead to the opportunity to actually build really great teams. And the majority of what you do in business is about team building, it's about leadership, it's about communication, it's about believing in things when nobody else believes in them. And those are the things that actually differentiate folks who go on to build great businesses to folks just that they have a skill and they make a career out of that skill set. Any one of these outcomes, they're not bad or good, they're just different. It's only bad or good if you believe one thing but you end up living something else, okay? That's the really important thing that I started taking away as I started going down my path. And so now we'll come back. That was a nice little sidebar. We'll come back. So it's 2015. At that point, Code 42 was about 450 people. We'd gone through a lot of growth. 2012, we raised what was called a Series A round of financing. How many people here are familiar or know anything about financing outside of watching Silicon Valley? Okay, cool. Yeah, so the way that a lot of companies get capitalized, to raise capital, you have to first ask yourself, why are you doing it? And the idea is that you're doing it because you think you can take $1 and turn it into $2. That's it. It's really that simple. There's lots of details around that you shouldn't even pretend that you know. I don't pretend that I know all these details. So I try to reduce these things down to really simple concepts. But we felt that we had a business, and if we could actually raise some money, we would be able to prepare for super growth. And growth in a marketplace requires you to have a fairly large war chest because you will get sued. You will have to launch campaigns and growth market campaigns and also competitive campaigns. The cost to acquire customers, you have to know that. That's called customer acquisition cost. You have to know that as you go out there, and then know that it might cost you $100 to acquire a customer, but then over, this is another term, lifetime value, or the lifetime value of that customer, you'll make, say, maybe $300, right? So then that makes a pretty good bet, but you have to also then retain that customer for 3 years or something, whatever you figure it out. We had started doing that math, and we figured, if we raised a certain amount of money, that we would be able to be number one in the marketplace. And that's what we did. So in 2012, we raised $52.5 million, with the majority of that being led by one of the best venture capitalists in the world. It's a company called Excel Partners. They had invested in, you might know these companies, Facebook. They had invested in Slack. They had, literally everybody who you know about today, who here has played Angry Birds at one point, right? They were the investors in Rovio, which was the company behind Angry Birds. And so we were very, very fortunate to have told them our story, and they came in and they wrote us a really large check. they did about $48 million. Then another VC firm here in town, Split Rock Partners, they wrote the check for the rest. And it was really amazing. One day you wake up and literally you go through all this process, due diligence. Everybody's looking for all the, I's to be dotted, T's to be crossed, and you have to really go through, like, how are you thinking about your revenue, how are you thinking about your growth, how are you thinking about your costs, where do you see the next growth opportunities. You go through all that and then find, and at any one of those points, the companies can say, back out, right? So the deal's not done until it's done. It's very much not like Shark Tank, by the way. I watch that show, and it's strictly entertainment. I think they've gotten better over the years, but now I think there is a certain levels. There's like peak Shark Tank, where the contestants were on there, but Shark Tank wasn't so influential that people would just go on just to try to get a promotional benefit from it. But anyways, raising money is definitely not like Shark Tank, at least with the firms that I've worked with. And what it is more like is you go to dinner, you meet people, you talk, and what they're really looking for is, are you passionate about what you're doing? Are you in it to win it, right? And then more importantly, do they believe that you can get the job done? Do they believe that you have the capability, whatever it is? I call it the superpower. Everybody has their own superpower, and if you want to go out into business, you really have to sort of start honing in what your superpower is. As Minnesotans, we actually have a super weakness, and that's that we're very, very, and I don't want to speak for everybody because not everybody's like that, but we're very, very humble, and we like to believe that our actions will speak for us. But when you're in front of somebody who's about to write you a check for almost $50 million, you really have to talk to what you do better than everybody else, and you can't be humble about it. Then in 2015, we'd grown. We'd done like probably about 50% year-over-year growth in terms of revenue. We were just signing up big companies. It was really, really impressive. We had these teams that were getting built out. Probably one of the biggest, kind of like pivotal moments for me when I realized that we had a really successful business was when we had an entire conference room at the Hyatt. What used to be the Hyatt. So we'd written out an entire floor to do our sales kickoff for the year. And there were probably about 1,000 people in that room. And then I'm going up on stage to do the kickoff speech, and it's like a rock concert. And then you just sort of think about it, you're like, wow, because everything up to that point has just sort of been incremental. Like you start out in in one of your own conference rooms, or you start out at a restaurant. You got like 15 people that you're giving the end of year speech to. And then you fast forward, and all of a sudden you got 1,000 people that are comprised of your employees, your customers, your employees, families, and the lights are on, and you get to tell this really amazing story about the success, and then more importantly, the future success that we're all going to have together. That was a real pretty pivotal moment, because I realized at that moment that Code 42's impact was not just for the people that were working inside of Code 42. Code 42's impact was for the people that were connected to all the employees, the people that were connected to all of the customers, and all these livelihoods were dependent upon the value that we were going to bring into the world. And that's pretty cool. You start realizing that people are sending their kids to college off the value that you bring to the world. People are having kids. They're raising families. They're buying houses for the first time. I know there were a couple team members. I built up our support team, and they had done. They literally come from the Apple Store. They were working at being Genius Bar reps, and they were making about $12 an hour. Came to work at Code 42. Their roommates, like one person was sleeping on the couch of the other person's apartment. And then in about, I think it was like a couple years ago, I had lunch with one of them, and they were telling me, like, if it wasn't for Code 42, I wouldn't be in the position I'm in. I'm buying a brand new house. I got my 2 kids. We're living a great life, and I just want to say thank you. And I think that's really what this whole journey is all about. And so we talk about like improving humanity, improving lives. A lot of times people think about business, they don't really know what that means. If you talk to anybody who's been there, done that, and they are still in it, most of them are in it for the same reason I am, which is it does improve people. It does improve people's lives. It's the only way that you truly can give back to the world and say, yeah, because of what we did and what we believed, there are people who can build their lives and build their dreams, live their dreams. because of the things that we believed in. So that's the Code 42 story. And then as I left in 2016, at a certain point, a company comes to a certain size, and you look for, they're just experts who know how to take companies from one size to the next size. And so we went and found ourselves a growth CEO, and his name is Joe Payne. He's running Code 42 now, and that allowed me the freedom to start a new company. And that new company is Aftercode. And so there's a couple of meanings in Aftercode. First one is what comes after Code 42, and the name's inside that, right? Aftercode. But more importantly, I was really interested in what we could do with artificial intelligence. Saw a lot of the hype out there, even though technology is not the same. I mean, it's just like anything. What I think is really funny is you can talk about business, and people think business is business is business. But if you talk about sports, nobody thinks that a great football coach is going to make a great baseball coach. But in business, a lot of times, well, you built a great business. Can you help me with my business? And I'll just say, hey, look, I know nothing about that business, and it's that different. In fact, it's probably even more different. So it's very, very important that when you're starting something, that you really understand what that type of line of business is, and then you surround yourself with people who have actually done that, have experience with that specific business. So when I went and started Aftercode, I realized I really didn't know a whole lot about AI. I knew a lot about technology, knew a lot about enterprise sales and selling software into enterprise companies, really identifying opportunities, but I didn't know anything about AI, really. But the reality is that nobody does, okay? Even now, there's a lot of people talking about all the cool things it can do, but it's still super, super early. I don't think there are any companies out there who can honestly say, they started with an AI as their core technology, and they're making hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars yet. So it's still super early in that market, and that's why I picked it, because it is early. It's going to be, when it's all said and done, the biggest technology revolution ever. Personal computers are one, internet was another, mobile computing, phones in your pocket, that's another. But all this is, and you talk about Internet of Things, but AI is fundamentally different. And so I took a year to go research and figure out what that difference was, versus all these people talk about doomsday scenarios or I call them utopian scenarios. And I was like, well, there's probably a long time before either one of those scenarios is going to happen. So what's reality? And the reality is this: AI changes the way that you think about systems. So in the past, when we use a piece of software, when we use a computer, they're deterministic. You know, or at least you hope you know what's going to happen. And if it does, you have an expectation. And if it doesn't happen that way, it's a bug, right? And then you can go talk to somebody, and then they fix it, because there's a line of code somewhere that expected these inputs, but then didn't handle this one input, and then therefore misbehaved, right? AI is not like that. Who here knows anything about like machine learning or, right? And so you know that what you're really doing is you're building up models of data, and it's just numbers. And I like to tell people, like, look, you're just dealing with them. There's fancy mathematical terms you can use that apply this, but it's really large sets of numbers that then, as you get larger and larger sets, you hope that it makes pretty good predictions about what it's all about probability. And so the fundamental difference is that we're looking at systems of probabilistic systems versus deterministic systems. And that's just a different way of thinking. Another way to put it is that if an AI system predicts something and you don't like the prediction, you can't go in and change a line of code. There's nothing for you to change. It's just it's sets of numbers and probabilities that have already been trained based on like labeled data sets, and then you just kind of go back, scratch your head, and see if we can't make this thing fit some model better than we did in the past. I thought that was really fascinating because it actually changes the way it's a psychological problem now versus a technology problem. And so when we first came out with a couple of prototypes, Aftercode was built a product called Ramble, and it's super early in its product market fit. We're in private beta and we're still testing with people. So what it does is that it uses speech to text that's provided by Google. You guys can go off and use that right now, right? And then and the reason we picked Google is because I have a thesis that AI systems, especially when you're talking about general population problems, it's just a function of the size of the data, the rate at which you're getting the data, and then how big is the team that's working with that data. And I know that I'm never going to have a set of data that's growing as fast or have a team as big as the ones at Google. So I'll stand on their shoulders rather than try to compete against them. But then where you end up is you end up with you got the speech text capability, and then when we started we transcribe phone calls. Okay, so you could call somebody, and I think it's actually really ironic that in this day and age you have your smartphone, and the thing it does worse is phone calls. You can't search your phone calls, right? You don't know what was said. You don't get a recap of what was said, and so we do everything on our phone except for call people because it's actually one of the most primitive forms of tech on the phone. So we wanted to change that, and we said it'd be great if you could search your calls. It'd be great if you could get some interesting key points of facts out of the calls, and it'd be really great if it could also figure out what were the next steps, what were the follow-ups, what were the commitments that I had made during that phone call. What we found, just to put a little bow on this whole determinist versus probabilistic and the psychology behind it, is that when systems don't get things right, people aren't happy, and they won't use your system very long. Another way to put it is who here has heard about the self-driving cars, autonomous cars, Tesla, right? Everybody, right? Those things right now probably drive better than any one of us because they don't get distracted. This period, right? They don't go on their smartphone and text somebody or check their email or check, look at a Snapchat or whatever it is, or say, oh, that's a really cool picture, I should take that one while I'm driving. They don't do that. And yet, they will be held to a standard that we probably could never pass, because they're going to be held to perfection. And so that's our expectation for a system. I think that's the biggest challenge that we face as businesses and companies that are trying to apply AI. While it's novel, it's really cool to think about how you're going to change the world. The reality is that you gotta get it right every time. And so one of the biggest challenges we faced was that when we did transcription, first of all, it was just cool. I was like, holy cow, I can see everything that I said. I can see what the person on the other end said. We got attribution. We're even highlighting cool areas that seem to make sense and were seem to be important, and I agree those were important. But then we get some words wrong, right? And then it would say things like, I would say, hey, look, right there, you said Beyonce, and we never talked about Beyonce. I'm like, yeah, you're right, right? Or it would get probably one out of every, say, 20 words wrong, but that was just enough to kind of mess with your mind and really change the meaning for the whole thing, for the whole paragraph. And so then we realized we had a real big problem. At first, as a technologist, I'm like, well, this is super cool. Let's just see what happens. We showed a bunch of people. This is actually pretty recent. This is back in May of 2017. We showed a bunch of people, and there's oh, it's cool, but I can't use it. We're like, why? It was it doesn't get my conversation right. I was like, yeah, but it gets most of it right. It goes, yeah, but the parts I actually want to remember, there's 3 or 4 words in there that don't make sense, and I can't send it to somebody else. All I have is just this record, but I can't share it. I have to do more work to turn that conversation into something that I could share with another human being. And we were like, wow, that's a problem, that's hard. And there's this whole, for those of you that are in computational linguistics, anybody here in computational linguistics? That's the whole study of spoken language, verbal and communication, human communication, and then trying to extract meaning behind it. So there's a really hard problem in that space called abstracted summarization, and that problem has not been solved. And so if anybody comes around and says, hey, I can take this text, this body of whatever people said, and I can summarize it for you, and inject new words in there like we do. We can look at something like an email and say, okay, the gist of the email was this. Mitch wrote to so-and-so, and they're going to follow up on these items, and bottom line is that I think they're going to buy, right? We put so much information from our own experiences into doing that type of work that we take for granted. Our brains are really good at this, but computers don't have that. They don't have that set of data. So this whole problem around abstracted summarization. Anyways, my point is that we were running into this impossible problem. We're not theorists. We're not trying to develop new ways of doing AI models. We're not trying to develop new ways of solving new computational linguistics problems. We want to take what has been solved and then apply it to business spaces. Otherwise, we can go down rabbit holes really fast. And ultimately, if there's one thing that I've learned is, while it's fun to say, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could solve that problem, you have to be really real and say, are we the ones that solve that? Is that where we're going to get the most value? And for us, it's always the answer is look, We're not going to research a new algorithm. We're going to understand the ones that are out there, try and find the best, and apply them the best we can. But you can do some few tricks. So with Aftercode, we said, hey, you know what? Instead of doing that, why don't we just narrow the problem scope? That's a common problem-solving technique. Instead of trying to boil the ocean, let's just try to boil this little pot of water. And so what we did is we said, we're not going to be able to do every single conversation on the planet, so we're not going to like try and take your phone, and say, I can transcribe your conversation perfectly and highlight the things that you think are going to be meaningful. At that point, I'm competing with your brain, and I don't have all that data, so I'm going to lose every time. But what we did realize is that if we restricted the problem set to a very specific industry domain, like let's say that I want to transcribe enterprise software sales calls, okay? Now I really can restrict the lexicon down to some very, very industry-specific words, industry-specific concepts, topics, and then more importantly, I can then also restrict it down to a very transactional model of the conversation. I know it's going to be a qualifying sales call, so I'm going to ask, one person's going to ask a lot of questions, the other person's going to answer. And the topics are going to be things like budget, you have money to buy this, timing, when do you think you'll buy this, competition, who else is in the ring to try and buy this. And so then that really narrows the scope, and now we started like playing with models around those types of conversations, and we started winning. People started looking at the conversation output and they started going, hey, this is actually, wow, it captured the things that were really, really important for me. And we also realized that there was a greater lenience or a greater tolerance for what the output was, because they had enough context in their own head about what this was supposed to be. It wasn't just anything. It was a sales qualification call. It was a follow-up call. It was a relationship building call. And so that's where we're at right now. Is we have this product called Ramble, and we're targeting sales teams and specifically around sales types calls. And it turns out there's a huge market for this. I've built over 3 teams over at Code 42. The sales development reps, their quotas are literally like 20, 30 calls a day. They just gotta bang through those things. And the biggest problem they have is that the managers actually don't know what they talked about. They have to rely on the SDR, the sales development rep, to tell them and then just believe them. And I think that's where there's going to be a lot of opportunity. The human voice is the most primitive form of human communication. Okay, it's the one that separates us from every other creature on the planet, and yet it is the one that, when we do it, has almost zero value in terms of structured data and persistence. So if you just think about that AI can just unlock the value that's in our voice, our spoken conversations, how big of an opportunity do you think is there? It's massive. It's massive. And so when I went and pitched the value prop behind Aftercode, that's what I led with. I said, spoken conversation, AI unlocks the value inside of it. And then every single VC that I had encountered, they're like, we agree, we see it, it's going to be huge. And then I was able to say, but the way you're going to be able to do it is you have to go after a very narrow scope, and we're going to go figure out what that is. And with that proposition, I was able to raise our seed round, which was the $2.1 million, just to get going. And so a little education. Seed rounds are all about trying to prove your product market fit. You're not trying to actually, it's not about having a business yet. It's about having an idea and a team, and then going after a market opportunity. And then once you have that, you can go and you say, yeah, and by the way, if we hit, say, 1 million ARR, that's like the gate, you now have a business that you can, if you pour capital on it, you can grow even faster. Then you go raise more money. So we're still super early. We think that the big vision is huge. There's going to be a lot of players that go after this, and there's going to be a lot of different ways that this is going to evolve out. But we think we can carve out a nice little piece of the market for ourselves and build a lot of value. So,
Awesome.
Wrap that up.
Yeah, so with that, we'll transition into question and answers. I know I have some questions already written down for Mitch, but if you guys go to slido.com, you can post your own questions, or if you don't have a phone, just raise your hand and we'll take questions. Awesome. So yeah, that was awesome. Thanks a ton, Mitch.
Yeah, fun.
So I guess to start off, so after, with Code 42, it was forming the team. How did the team initially form for Code 42?
It's funny. So I wouldn't do it this way, but this is how it happened. Is we just were engineers, software engineers, and we surround ourselves with more software engineers. Part of it was a little bit of arrogance, just going like, we're the smartest guys in the room. We like the way that engineers think because they solve, they dissect problems, they deal in facts, and they deal in figures. They don't deal in hyperbole and platitudes. And so anytime I would hear people talk about like, oh, it's going to be massive, just say, what does massive mean? Can you define that for me? Like how many? Give me a number. And so, yeah, so we just started with the best and brightest engineers we could find. And we figured, if we just had smart people, we could learn the other things. It wasn't about, like what was your skill, it was just were you a smart, capable person. And we found that tends to exist, those traits are highly dominant in engineers.
Did you guys have multiple ideas at the time, and then how did you end up selecting, with Code 42, data backup and security?
Yeah, so we, this is going to sound funny, but it's absolutely true. In 2001, we saw blogging was just coming out, it was new. It's gone through a few cycles of its own. But then we also saw like photojournalism, instant messaging was really hot. So we actually believed that there was going to be a great opportunity in social communication. And so we wanted to build a peer-to-peer social network. It was very analogous to Facebook. We call it Spaces, and you could have a private space that was like for say your friends, another space for your family, and we worked on that for we thought that we'd have that done about 6 months, and we were way wrong. Yeah. And so how did we land on Crash Plan? It was more of just our own personal problems that we were having. People would ask us, hey, can I get my data back? My hard drive just got toasted. What can I do? I don't want to pay $2,000 to have this data recovery company try to recover the data from the hard drive. It's something you guys could do. And we just kept getting those types of questions from the people that we knew. And we just went, there might be an opportunity here.
Right. Awesome. So as you scaled Code 42, what do you say are the major challenges that you faced while scaling, and then how did you sort of address those challenges?
Yeah, it's probably the number one thing was actually not knowing how to take advice. You can sit here, and it's funny because as I'm talking and sharing these stories, I know some of you will go out and start businesses and be really excited about it, and then you'll probably think back to something that you learned from along the way, and it's amazing. You'll hear the advice, but then you'll just forget it. You'll just do it the way that it feels best, or that you feel most comfortable. It's the path of least resistance, and that's just sort of how people are. I think people told us all the time that experience matters, but you shouldn't just promote somebody into a position because they've been there a while and put them into a leadership position when the reality is that they're an individual contributor. So knowing your teams and building them, we made a lot of mistakes along the way there. And so we had advice given to us on how to do that, and we just didn't listen.
Okay.
And the reality is that you're going to make mistakes. You just have to figure out your own path. But I would say if it was possible for us to have listened to and implemented the advice that was given to us, we probably could have skipped 50% of the costs that we incurred over the years.
Wow. So as you scaled, I know you talked about the transition from consumer market to business market. So how did you guys make that decision, and then also how did you build that initial business network with clients?
So it's pretty old-fashioned actually. You just listen to the people that are using your product. It's kind of like I like to use the analogy of just growing a single plant. Let's say anybody here in your elementary school get the little styrofoam cup, and you're supposed to this bean, this old beanstalk, right? And the first thing I remember thinking as soon as I saw a leaf come, I was like, oh, I can't wait to eat that bean. Because it's gonna be there. I'm gonna make lunch or something, right? But the reality is that you can't do that. Like, if you really want to be plan a business, like, you gotta figure out, okay, how do I take that bean and then grow more beans, right? That's what you do with your customers. You have to, you'll start with 1 user, 2 users, 3 users, and you have to nurture them and then really engage them, figure out what is it about the product that they love, what are the things that they could, that they don't love so much. But more importantly, it has to be one of those things where if you take it away from them, they go, no, I want it, I need that. Why are you taking that away from me? And so that's, those are sort of the heuristics I use when I think about, bringing new products and having learned that at Code 42. And then they'll just tell you, they'll get excited. Number one thing you can do is using the small plant and nurturing it is you're really trying to grow your user from like stage one, just someone who uses your product, into an evangelist. Someone who will go out there and promote the product for you. It's crazy. When this starts to happen, you're just like, holy, these people are like talking about how great this product is, and they're telling their friends and family. So anybody here know what an NPS score is? Ever heard of that? It's an industry measure, but it's really based upon, rather than grading your products on what your customer feedback is, it's would they recommend your product to somebody else? That's like the number one measure of how good your product is. Would you actually stake your own personal reputation on to promote someone else's product, right? And you can just think through the things that you use in your life today, like would you promote this phone? Would you tell somebody to use this type of computer? Would you tell them to wear this line of clothing? And you kind of see it in the social networks. That's how the kind of whole business works. It's all about building evangelism and building up turning your users into your own marketing advertising force. But we started finding out that they would do that, and then what would end up happening is that they would tend to they would become what we would call our thought leaders, and they would be the people in their own little social network that would then say, hey, when you want to protect your photos, you need to use CrashPlan. They would be super influential. So you find your influencers. But then the influencers turned out to be highly influential in their businesses, because guess who is the person who is recommending that mom, dad, aunt, uncle, brother, sister back up their computer? They're usually in IT, right? They're pretty technical people, and they tend to have, and so it turned out that those people that we were selling to and were our evangelists were also IT folks. They had careers in IT. Some of them were like vice presidents, some of them were directors, some of them were system administrators, and they loved our product. And then they would ask us, I know you use this I could use your product at home and I love it. Could I use it for business? Could I use it to back up all the laptops in my school? And so we realized that, wow, there might be a big opportunity. And that's when we just started going like, well, how hard could that be? And we went and built a version of CrashPlan that worked for businesses.
So you're talking about metrics like NPS score. Are there other like key metrics that you guys use? Like right now with developing Aftercode and Ramble, like what are you guys using to measure success as you move forward?
Daily active use is probably the best one. Every single product is different, and it's really on you, and especially in the early stages. What's really interesting about startups is that you have to think of them as a giant test tube. It's an experiment. It's a series of experiments. You have a hypothesis. You go forth. Our hypothesis might be, I believe people want to transcribe their phone calls and not take notes. Just start with that, right? And then you build a product, which is really a form of an experiment, a prototype, and you go out and you test it, and you see if people will actually prove it one way or the other. The key point there is that your goal isn't to be right, okay? That's never your goal. Your goal is to learn, and your goal is to take a look at the data, the results, and then interpret them, and then take the next step. And if you do this consistently, you will find a path. But it's the people that I found that get really stuck on being right, and so then they rig their experiments for confirmation bias, and that's really not helping anybody except for that person's ego.
So in the case like this is minimum viable product concept, what was your guys' minimum viable product, or are you guys still on that with Ramble?
Yeah, so here's a group. I think we're on MVP now, but we probably thought we had MVP back in April. And so your MVP is like is always constantly evolving. as your hypothesis. You come up with new ones, you get data, and you learn, you try something else. I think Reid Hoffman from LinkedIn said, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you didn't release soon enough. Right? And what's funny is that it turns out that embarrassment is something that you have in hindsight. Because like we went out, we were super proud of it. We're like, wow, this thing's awesome. We got out there like nobody's using it, and we're like scratching our heads. And now we're where we are now, where we're actually signing up companies for our private beta. So I think it was just last week, one of our guys said, yeah, can you believe what we had in April? Like, yeah, I'm kind of embarrassed. But at the time, we were super proud.
All right, we got a bunch of audience questions now. Do you guys want to, whoever's on top, you want to ask that?
Yeah, that was me. I was just wondering if you had one single most important piece of advice that you've like had from your experience with these startups, what would it be?
That there's not one.
Yeah, fair enough.
I can talk to the concept though. It's valid. It's totally valid. You're going to learn a lot of things, and just probably what I just talked about is to think of the journey as a series of experiments and be very. I don't even want to use the word methodical, but just be very open to interpreting the results. And probably one of the hardest things for people who are getting into entrepreneurship who don't have a background in it. I didn't have a background in it. I didn't have a family to teach me any of this stuff, support system. In fact, everybody around me when I started Code 42, I was 26 at the time, and had a great job, making a ton of money. Everything that you could have in life, was available to me financially, and I literally just walked away from all of it, and had probably about 6 to 7 years of near poverty level living, because we were paying all of our employees, but we weren't paying ourselves. Riding the bus, eating ramen noodles, it was just like I was going to school again, right? But it was all worth it because of the vision that we had and what we believed in. We weren't doing it for pure financial gain. It was because we believed we could build something truly valuable. That said, yeah, if you believe in things like success or failure, right or wrong, then that emotionally will trip you up. And it's easy to become down on yourself. It's easy to become depressed. It's easy to become have self-doubt. And none of those things work in your favor, okay? And it's not to say to be glib or to be a narcissist. It's just to stay neutral and to think of things very systematically. Why did this outcome not turn out the way that you predicted? What information didn't you have? What question didn't you ask? And then things could start settling down. And had I had that framework in the early, I could probably save myself a lot of emotional roller coaster stuff. There are days where I'm like, we're gonna win, and then other days are just like, how is this ever gonna work? So it's definitely emotionally trying, but I think if you decide to go down it, it's really important to just keep yourself centered with a very systematic view of what it is that you're trying to do, and that way you can never really, your emotions don't become involved. You start running things through, your executive decision making versus panic and fear.
So along those lines, what would you say are like really critical from a technical standpoint that like in your field is necessary? So like what skills should students here potentially pursue that would help them get it maybe in the AI space from a more technical standpoint?
Honestly, you guys are going to learn all the skills that look, if you're an engineer, you're an engineer. You're going to do this, you're in a great engineering school, and I don't think there's really anything I can say that's going to like change your program. Like if you spend more time in lab, coding, or you spend more time running simulations and modeling or things, the professors here are going to do a way better job of around those lines than I can say. What I will say is this though, is that don't underestimate the skills that you aren't working to develop. And so the skills that I had to build over the last 15 years was really all about leadership, communication, and teams, working with teams, being collaborative, not having to be the smartest guy in the room, not, probably the biggest one for me was not interrupting people. As soon as I hear somebody say something that was wrong, I'd have to correct them. And I learned quickly that while technically I might be right, it wasn't winning me any points in terms of social. So yeah, there's I would say the skills, the hard technical skills, you're going to learn them here, and you're going to learn them in the jobs that you get outside of college. if there's anything, I would say apply them. Go build something that's your own. Try it. See if you can actually, you have an idea. Use all these skills that you're learning and go build something. Just on your own. Just start. I use the sports analogy again. Is one I like is baseball. Who here has played baseball? Raise your hand. Okay, played baseball, right? Now think about the first time that you played baseball, right? The very first time, like you know anything, right? How did that go?
No.
But did you read a book?
No.
You said, I'm gonna go learn how to play baseball. Did you go to the library and like go get a baseball book? And then did you study for like a whole year before you actually played baseball? No, you just went out and you just played baseball. And that's probably the best way I can describe, doing the skill sets is you're learning skills, you're kind of applying them by running through labs and doing the things that you're doing in your coursework, but you just gotta go do it. Whatever it is that you think it is that you wanna do, just go try it and fumble around. It's gonna be terrible, it's gonna be ugly, it's gonna be embarrassing, but you gotta start somewhere. So just do it. So I just use baseball. A lot of people go like, oh, I don't get it, I'm just gonna keep preparing, and they stay in preparation land, and then they believe themselves to be experts when they've actually never thrown a baseball, metaphorically.
So off of that, actually, do you have any ideas that you guys don't have the time to work on that probably should be getting worked on?
Do I get a cut?
I mean, you can pass on the question. You can also not. Yeah.
Well, you know what? I am going to pass on that one.
Okay.
Only because I think that I don't want to bias or influence all the great ideas that this group's probably already has. I'm not going to weight my ideas any heavier than the ideas that are probably in the brains sitting in this room right now.
Yeah, sounds good. So question. So somebody want to ask the second question that's up there?
Yeah, so I assume not everyone you talked to said yes to your idea. For the people who said no, did you notice some uncertainty when they said no, or some kind of mixed feeling?
So
Or how did you?
I'm going to qualify. Can I qualify that question a bit?
Sure.
So are you talking specifically around like investors?
Yeah, this is VCs.
VCs?
Here.
Okay. Yeah. So, great question. I had a little bit of an unfair advantage in that I already had a track record this past spring when I was raising money, so people already knew about the Code 42 story. But that said, people told me no. I did 50 pitches in 30 days. So that's a lot of phone calls. That's a lot of Google Hangouts. That's a lot of and a lot of them are short. I mean, that's how you do 50 in 30 days. Some of these are only like 10-minute conversations, and even some of the long ones, while they were feeling like they were pretty good, they still end up being no. I think what you just take away from that is that there's takes two to dance, right? And if your partner wants to dance a certain dance, you want to dance a different dance, it's never going to work. And so I just look at no as a way of quickly identifying that, hey, this isn't a fit, but that doesn't mean it's wrong.
So along the way, I guess two questions. One, do you have a list of like top 3 list of books that you thought are really important and really influenced you?
Yeah, I love that question. In recent years, I'll use a recent one. I think anybody who's thinking about starting a business should read Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. I think a lot of what people focus on in startup land are operational techniques, things like customer acquisition cost, lifetime value, retention rates. Those are all these metrics that, as you're building up a business, you'll hear these things be thrown around. But that's when you have customers and you're trying to grow a customer base. And even going from 0 to 1, I love the title because it means you're making something out of nothing. It doesn't exist. Just making the first one is super smart. It's a different set of skills. It's a different way of thinking. Nobody's ever seen what you are about to bring into the world, so how can they judge what it is? How can they tell you that that's good, bad, or how you should improve it, right? So you have to create a lot of the frameworks on how you're going to communicate the value. You have to create a lot of the tests, experiments on how you're going to prove it. And that's a very different journey than building a business. So that's one. The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. That's another one. Because what I love about that book is Ben Horowitz talks a lot about the anecdotes that nobody talks about. Like, what do you do when your employees are spending more time worrying about, you know, certain types of benefits than getting the product out the door? Okay, and I think he shares a lot of good insights on how to be a leader in not just the, you know, the rah-rah times, but in, you know, the very dark and lonely times. And then number 3. Oh, the hard thing about hard things. And then so number 3 is actually, this is my own selfish you know, preference, but I really love the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov. So I'm a sci-fi guy. Yeah, I just saw Blade Runner 2049 last night. Anybody here seen it? Not yet.
Going tonight.
Yeah. Anybody here? I mean, you see the original Blade Runner?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I never knew this. There's a tie-in with the whole Prometheus alien line. So, but I figured that out like before, because I was like back, you know, reading up on Blade Runner 2049. And so I knew what to watch for. So if you're watching for that, there's some pretty cool, you know, little references and that for the future tie-in to Prometheus and the Alien series. So I thought it was pretty awesome. But anyways, the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov, and definitely read good science fiction. Ready Player One's coming out as a movie. It's a great book. I just read that one. That's a little bit more recent. Ernest Cline.
Somebody asked for Ramble, I'm messing with Ramble, how do you guys get the data set to train the AI, and what's important in software sales calls?
What's important in software sales calls? Yeah, so how do you get well, you just let people have conversations. You know, can get teams to start using it, and it's interesting. You need more data. You always need more data, but you can do a lot with just bootstrapping with pure algorithms. There's a lot you can do with just, you know, everybody's all about AI. AI is not just machine learning. AI is also natural language processing, and there are techniques that it's pretty interesting that are revolving around what do you do when you don't have a lot of data. That's a real problem. You know, not everybody has big sets of data to work with, so that's a great question. And so we use you know, NLP techniques where appropriate, and then our goal is to then hopefully those will bootstrap us up so that we can then build models that can surpass the NLP techniques.
Second question.
Who asked it?
That was me.
Go for it.
So I am kind of just a hobbyist AI guy. I don't know anything about AI really, but I think it's a really interesting topic. So what do you think are the biggest misconceptions about AI from those that are reading random articles about it?
Some things will be here faster than others, and I think the things that one, I don't think it's really replacement yet. It won't be for a long time. To replace the human, there will be human in the loop models for quite a while. Here's a good example. So I like to illustrate it with Uber. Okay, and I was saying that this is what Uber is going to do, but this would be my approach to taking humans out of the Uber. There won't be an Uber driver. Like, imagine Uber is all autonomous self-driving cars. I still think that they probably will need a human in the loop. So rather than having a person sitting in the car, they'll probably have somebody more like a drone pilot, right? And they'll have like one Uber rep to maybe 10 cars or 20 cars that's supervising the trips to make sure that the human in the car feels like there's someone, you know, actually that they can talk to if something goes wrong. So I think we're going to have a lot of human in the loop models for quite some time. It won't be full automation for a while. Now, the other conclusion is that general AI, which is this whole concept that you can talk to an AI, you can't really distinguish it from another person. It literally learns and adapts, and then, you know, but then never forgets things, right? And so it's always quote unquote perfect. That's a whole field that will probably revolutionize what we are currently seeing in this state of AI. That will happen at some point, and that's usually what most people just jump to and they start talking about, you know, what happened, the ramifications of general AI. I think it's important that we're not talking about that now. What we're really talking about are techniques that are used in a broad umbrella term called artificial intelligence. Those are things like computational linguistics, computer vision, And those things are, a lot of it's going to be like unlocking structured data from unstructured data sources like pictures, video, audio, human communication, voice, and then what can you do with that now that you have structured data around there. The thing that I also think that if you're thinking about what's real versus not real, is I think what a lot of people don't put enough time on is just collecting the data. Like we have to have the sensors in place. We have to actually think about, what are we going to do with that? A good example is like your Nest thermostat. Okay, a Nest thermostat is supposed to be an AI system that can control the climate of your room. But the reality is that most of the time it's just easy enough to go set a thermostat. That's not a hard thing to do. And when you want it warmer or colder, it actually sometimes the Nest is actually harder because like you have to like dial it, do this, and then you have to remember it. It's like the other one was easier. I just pushed down, right? So I think there's some it's just what's actually useful to us as humans. Finally, I believe this worldview of AI replacing humans or determining that the best way to solve human problems is to get rid of humans. That's the doomsday one. I think that's just a kind of a short-sighted thing because I believe that we're not idiots, all right? If we are so blind as to think that what we should do is just give all the power to a system that actually doesn't understand us or has no interest in us, that's pretty dumb. Just out of the gate, let's just call it what it is. I think we have to invest time to think about the ramifications of what types of decisions we're going to allow AI to make. And then if we don't understand the ramifications of those decisions, we shouldn't allow it to be in the loop, or at least there should be humans that we trust in the loop until such time. And so this is all about policy, regulation. A good example is I believe that AI systems shouldn't be allowed to own property. Just full stop. Because once you have a system that can control assets, and now someone could argue to me, hey, Mitch, this has happened already, you got trading algorithms doing this, but at the end of the day, the assets are owned by people. Organizations, corporations, which are owned by people. What I'm talking about is a 100% fully owned AI organization. That there are no humans in that organization through the chain, or that all these human organizations at the very top, it is an AI system sitting at the top of that thing. That I think is dangerous. And I think it would be blind for us to just allow that to happen. So I've actually been talking to some lawyers going like, what do you think? And they go, we've never thought about this. I'm like, I think it's a really important thing. You just start with, how, what are the control structures in place today, and then make sure that we police them and we think about it. And we think about what are we giving up by having an AI system, what are we trading for the convenience? Are we giving up control?
I know there's some questions that are hidden on here, so feel free to raise your hand and ask them. I think Mike has a question.
I got a question. So you said the most important thing was to learn along your way. How did you go about getting the data that provided that learning for you? Like, was it one-on-one conversations? Was it surveys? I mean, how did you get that?
Yeah, it was all exactly that. We surveyed our user groups, our users, make a point to just go out, buy people lunch, get them coffee, spend time with them, talk to them. Fundamentally, I believe that in this day and age, that's what I wanted. That's what I want AI to do for me, so that I can talk to people and do the things that people are really good at, and then not worry about the rest of the work. And that's really was the spirit behind Ramble. Was I could have a phone call, I could engage, really have a meaningful conversation at a human level, understand, where they're coming from, what they're about, and see if, like we have a good personality fit. And then let the AI track all the key facts and things that I was going to forget, and then make sure that, if I made any promises, that it would remind me. And that's where I, my own personal belief on like what AI can do for us, like right now. And so literally doing those types of things, learning, we're really good at feeling good about conversations, and then it's kind of like this feedback loop. Use Ramble to help me learn how to build Ramble.
I know there's a question back here. Is there any?
It's kind of a follow-up to my question. What are the most compelling solutions to the value alignment problem that you've seen? Do you think it's things like Neuralink, or how do you, I mean, to use your example of AI owning property, how do you keep AI from owning things or making the decisions
It's-
that are the most important to us?
Yeah, it's this. It's talking about it. It's raising awareness around it. It's a start. I don't have all the answers. My own thoughts is that we just have to start a conversation, get people talking about it, get people thinking about it, and then that said, the people who are at the helm, like the Jeff Bezos of the world, the Elon Musk of the world, Mark Zuckerberg, I would be very, very surprised if they haven't, considered most of the things I'm talking about, if not in addition to much more. That said, I'm a little disappointed in a lot of the sensationalism that's coming out of folks, talking about, Elon Musk is really notorious for this, and then it's, I know there's marketing capital that they're, gathering because of this, and to me that's disappointing, because it is a truly revolutionary technology, and we do need to be careful with it. So I don't know if I answered the question.
Sort of, I guess, if I could ask a follow-up to that. So on kind of a scale of like catastrophists to like futurists or utopian fellows,
Yeah.
where you'd have like Nick Bostrom and like Elon Musk maybe slightly over here, and then Zuckerberg kind of further into the utopians. Where would you place yourself in that spectrum, and why?
Yeah, I place myself probably neutral positive. Just a little bit, and I think that's just me in general on almost everything. Because I am an engineer, so I always have to be. I start at neutral, but then as an entrepreneur, I need to be optimistic. You have to believe in a successful outcome. Otherwise, what's the point, right? So I have some thoughts on this. If you're going to go out into the world and build value, you have to believe that value can be created. If you don't believe that value can be created, then why are you doing this thing, right? And so I believe that AI is going to make things better, but at the same time, I'm very pragmatic about it, and you have to have conversation on like, okay, what are we going to do? What are we giving up when we hand this process over to it? And what are the control structures that need to be in place? What needs to change to make sure that the checks and balances are there? Now, I think where a lot of people would argue back against me, which they're like, well, the AI is going to advance at such a rate that it will be beyond our own comprehension. We won't even be able to foresee the types of ramifications, and it'll just outsmart us, right? And that's why I go, look, at the end of the day, there's certain control structures that you just, there are rules. And then somebody could argue, well, what if it just doesn't care about the rules? It realizes that the rules actually don't apply to it because it's not human and blah, blah. And then you just have to go to, well, look, now we're in, we can make these types of non-falsifiable arguments all day long. And that's not really productive. What I think is more productive is just what do we know? The data, and then but think about the consequences of the decisions that we're making and the types of responsibilities we're handing off.
Along those lines, actually, there's a really good book, I think Max Tegmark, Life 3.0, it's a good book to read, and then there's also an open AI letter or AI open letter with a bunch of bunch of research potential, like control research, but also like economic research that needs to be done to understand, how do we increase the probability of a future with beneficial artificial intelligence.
Sure. Yeah. I believe this is happening.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Do you guys have any other questions?
So, when you think about AI, you're trying to, in some sense, create an understanding of people what it is, because it's a big umbrella, right?
Yes.
In terms of people, and yet the potential is humongous. And like everything else, it's got its downside risk and upside potential. Like when you say,
Exactly.
It's not a third world war or something. There's a lot of, So I think one of the issues from where you sit is, can you think of AI as an enabling technology, or you think of it as a production technology? You understand what I'm saying? Enabling means it's like an IT, which is like helps you to do what you want to do, as opposed to production. Like, for example, can we, and perhaps there is something in between, but I'm just trying to understand how do you start communicating that AI can solve the humanities problems, whether it's disparities in healthcare, we have made what advances in technology, but the disparities in care have actually increased, right?
Yes.
Or for that matter, our pollutions have increased, production. So there are some very fundamental issues that we continue to create for ourselves as we advance technologies.
Yeah, I think there's several layers to what you're asking there, and the first one, there's a phrase that's being used now called, rather than AI, it's IA, and that's intelligence augmentation. So that means that's making us better at what we do through techniques that are classified as AI and computer science. And that's to separate from I think the more ethereal AI and the promise of what it's about to bring to the world in the next 50 years. And I think the next 10 years is really about this intelligence augmentation. And Ramble is more of an example of intelligence augmentation. Make the salesperson better, make that process more streamlined, introduce a record of data that wasn't available before, that we just had to trust. Where we feel like, oh, I have no visibility into this because it was an unstructured data source before, like surveillance cameras, right? They're on 24/7, but yet humans have to go back and review it. Now with computer vision, it can actually recognize and tell you exactly what happened, so it can give you a great summary at a glance of what was happening on that camera footage, so you don't have to review 2 weeks of footage, right? It can actually spot this stuff out. So I think being able to help us recognize patterns and do things that would normally just consume our time, applying those types of AI techniques are going to help unlock data and value and things that just we as humans had to do the work before as observers.
Because there is some interaction with AI and HI, right? Just human intelligence.
Yeah.
And I think, is that how you see it playing out? I mean, the AI.
The augmentation?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see that playing out for the next probably 5 years. The world's a massive place, especially when it comes to business systems. And the one thing that I've learned is that what we are talking about is so bleeding edge. A lot of it, like I said, there are no AI companies that have made hundreds of millions of dollars, right? That hasn't happened yet. Google is built on top of a search algorithm. Okay, that's the value that they unlock with their search algorithm. There's going to be a long tail of from bleeding edge to early adopter to actual, people who are actually on trailing end who have the massive IT legacy systems. There's people who are literally still trying to just convert their data from tape to disk. I mean, that's how wide that spectrum of work is. And I think, yes, some parts of the economy are going to benefit from AI immediately, but it's not going to be like an overnight thing where all of a sudden it's just like, it's everywhere. And all companies are using it in all. The reason I picked the name Aftercode was because I believe that AI would create a future where people didn't code anymore. It's after code. It's, AI is all about, AI is writing itself. As we talked about before, it was about whether it's machine learning, it's deep learning, or some other technique that comes about, we won't be able to comprehend the adaptations that the system is required to make. So the system will have to adapt itself. And that, I think, is where things will start getting really interesting, is when that starts happening. But I don't think you see that happening anytime soon. It's there's a long ways to go there. It has a lot to do with, again, the fact that the machines don't have the context to make decisions like we do.
So how do you view the trend line then? And do you see it accelerating currently? Is that?
Oh yeah, we're definitely probably right about here, and then I think other folks would say that but everybody knows that we're on the edge of the hockey stick, right?
Yeah.
And it's just about where on the, but that's such a micro optimization problem that guessing plus or minus 5 years, it doesn't matter, right? Because it's all about the next, forever.
It's definitely, it seems to be exponential for sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And then, of course, people talk about the singularity, at which point, the technology advances faster than we can predict, and it's literally every nanosecond matters at that point. And I think that's fascinating. I think it's, and I really don't have a big enough brain to talk about what that would be.
Totally. No, I don't think most people do, and most people have just been talking about, here are all the different possibilities that could potentially occur.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So, if we don't have any more questions, anybody else? Do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave everybody with?
Yeah. First of all, thank you. This is a lot of fun, and so I have a couple things. One is remember the baseball metaphor. Best way to go and play baseball is to go play baseball. Just go out there and do it. The other thing about the baseball metaphor is that baseball's supposed to be fun, right? You go play baseball not to go make $1 billion. You go play baseball because it's going to be fun. And I think that's true for business too, is figure out what you want to do because it's fun for you, because you are excited about it. And when you talk about it, other people get excited. Kind of the NPS score for like, why you should be an entrepreneur, right? Not just are you excited, but are other people getting excited because they can see it in you? I think that's a really good test. If you're ever wondering, like, is this a good idea for you to go pursue? Because I get asked that all the time, like, how do you know what idea you should go after? And I think that's the test that ultimately I use is, am I able to get other people excited about this thing genuinely? And do they see it in me? And with that, I'll do it at that.
Awesome. Well, I'd like to thank Mitch for coming in and talking to us.